When you're a professional athlete, sometimes you feel invincible. Then one day my doctor tells me I have colon cancer, the second biggest killer of all cancers. The difference is, with colon cancer, if you find it early, it's curable 90% of the time. Today I'm cured. I'm back playing professionally.
Here is the shocking truth they never fully told you. At 64 years old, Eric Davis is still fighting, not on a baseball diamond, but in hospitals, on stages, and in front of cameras, telling the world what his prime years taught him the hard way. He looks like the next unstoppable force in baseball. Then his body, a broken system, and a cancer battle the size of a fist. Cut that story down. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. And if you want to show some love for this story, go ahead and use the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It helps more people find stories like this one. What really stole his prime first? Was it the injuries that piled up season after season? Was it the skepticism that followed him like a shadow? Or was it the cancer that arrived without warning and nearly ended everything? The answer is all three, and the way they stacked on top of each other is a story baseball has never fully reckoned with. Today, Eric Davis stands near 64, and he is done staying quiet. He partners with healthcare institutions like the St. Elizabeth Cancer Center. He runs a campaign called Score Against Colon Cancer. He stands next to doctors and tells crowds of people one simple message: get checked early, because ignoring pain does not make you tough, it makes you vulnerable. He uses his own body as the proof. He uses his own survival as the evidence. And he argues that the very culture that celebrated his fearless style on the field was the same culture that almost killed him off of it. He is not out there running from his history. He is running toward it. He is using every difficult chapter of that career, every crash into a wall, every unanswered hospital phone, every anonymous quote from an unnamed executive, as material for a message that might reach someone who needs to hear it before their story takes a turn his nearly did. That is the shape his life has taken at 64, and it may be the most important thing he has ever done with a platform. But to understand where he stands today, you have to go back to where it all began. You have to go back to when Eric Davis was not a warning, but a wonder. You have to go back to Cincinnati in the mid-1980s, when a young man from South Central Los Angeles was showing the baseball world something it had never quite seen before. You have to go back to a time when the conversation around Eric Davis was not about what he had lost, but about what he might still become. When the numbers were pointing upward and the comparisons were reaching for the highest names the sport has ever produced. That was the starting point. That is the frame you need to carry through everything that came next. Hold on to how bright that beginning looked. Hold on to the number 49 home runs and 93 steals over 162 games. Hold on to the gold gloves and the electric plays, in the sense that this man was only getting started. Then watch what the sport and the culture and the body's limits did to all of that. The contrast is the point. The contrast is what makes this story worth telling. In Cincinnati, during the mid-1980s, there was a player people called Eric the Red. He was something the sport had rarely seen before. He could hit for power. He could fly around the bases. He could track down fly balls in ways that looked physically impossible for a human being. He did all three of these things at the same time, at the same level, and at the same electric pace. His nickname fit because he was not just a player. He was a force. He was the kind of athlete who made people stop what they were doing and lean toward the screen. He was the kind of player whose name went into conversations about all-time greats, not as a fringe mention, but as a serious candidate. When you watched him play at his best, it felt wrong that more people did not understand how rare it was to see a man move and hit and defend the way he did, all at once, all in the same uniform, all in the same inning sometimes. The numbers from his rolling 162-game peak, spanning June of 1986 through July of 1987, are still hard to believe when you see them written down. Over that window, he hit 49 home runs, stole 93 bases, batted .307, posted a .405 on-base percentage, and slugged .629. Shift the window slightly, from June 1986 through June 1987, and he hit 46 home runs and stole 99 bases. No player in Major League Baseball history had ever matched that combination of power and speed over any 162-game stretch. Not one. His 1986 single season alone showed 27 home runs and 80 steals in just 132 games. His 1987 season brought 37 home runs and 50 steals in 129 games, with a 7.9 wins above replacement that placed him among the elite players in the sport. Contemporary greats like Barry Bonds, Rickey Henderson, and Ken Griffey Jr. all built durable Hall of Fame careers, but none of them, during their best 162-game window, matched the power and speed combination that Davis put together during that stretch. That is not a knock on those players. It is a statement about how genuinely special Eric Davis was at his absolute ceiling. It is the kind of peak that makes you wonder what the full career numbers could have looked like if the body had held together the way the talent deserved. The math on a healthy, durable Eric Davis is almost impossible to run without arriving somewhere in Hall of Fame territory. That is not revisionist history. That is an honest look at what was already there and what the sport was given a brief, brilliant window to witness before the injuries began pulling the curtain down. But that ceiling had a price, and the price was written into the very way he played. Davis stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed around 165 pounds. That is a slender frame by any standard, and by baseball standards for a power hitter, it was almost impossibly lean. He played with a physical ferocity that bordered on reckless. He dove for balls he had no business reaching. He slammed into walls that did not give way. He pushed his body through every single at-bat and every single chase, as if his life depended on it. Coaches loved it. Fans loved it. The sport celebrated it. But that 165-pound frame was absorbing punishment that it was simply not built to handle over the long run. The praise that surrounded his fearless style was real, but it was also a trap. Every time the crowd roared after a diving catch, every time a broadcaster called him fearless or incredible or unbelievable, it reinforced the idea that this was the right way to play. And for Davis, a man who had built his entire identity around the idea that excellence required total sacrifice, that praise was fuel. It kept him running at the wall even when the wall was winning. The sport gave him no real framework for pulling back. It gave him no language for saying, I need to protect this body because it is the only one I have, and these walls are not moving. It gave him instead a crowd that screamed loudest when he threw himself at danger, and a culture that called that screaming admiration. The injuries came early and never really stopped. Over his 17-year Major League career, he managed to play more than 135 games in a single season exactly once. Just once. He dealt with hamstring tears repeatedly. He had chronic knee problems, including a condition called Osgood-Schlatter disease that required major off-season surgery back in 1984, before his peak years had even fully arrived. He suffered shoulder separations. He had wrist problems. He dealt with chronic neck trauma. The list reads like a medical chart for a player who was always running at full speed toward a collision that had not happened yet. It reads like evidence, in hindsight, that the body was sending signals long before anyone in the system around him was listening. And then the collisions happened in ways that could not be ignored. On September 4th, 1987, Eric Davis was tracking a fly ball against the Chicago Cubs at Wrigley Field. He was having a season that was pointing toward history. At the pace he was on, there was a real chance he would become the first player in Major League Baseball history to hit 40 home runs and steal 50 bases in the same season. Nobody had ever done it. He was approaching it. Then he crashed into the brick outfield wall at Wrigley Field at full speed to make a game-saving catch. The impact tore into his ribcage. He missed 17 of the Reds' final 27 games. When he came back, he had to wear a protective vest around his torso to protect the injury. That vest changed his mechanics at the plate. It changed the way he moved, the way he loaded, the way he swung. He finished the season with 37 home runs, 3 short of 40, and 50 steals. He got to the 50 steal mark, but the 40 home run line sat just out of reach. The history he was chasing disappeared into a brick wall on the north side of Chicago, and it never came back. Still, even after that, the sport held on to the idea that he was indestructible. He had made the catch, he had come back, he had still posted elite numbers. The narrative was that Eric Davis was tough, that he played through it, that this was a feature, not a warning sign. The culture looked at a man who had crashed into a brick wall and missed nearly half a month of play and said, "See how tough he is?" Nobody stopped to ask how many more crashes his body could actually absorb. Nobody in a position of responsibility sat down with him and said, "The way you play is going to cost you years, and we need to talk about what that means." The celebration was louder than the warning, and so the warning never came. 3 years later, the real warning came, and it came during the biggest stage the sport has. Game 4 of the 1990 World Series. Cincinnati Reds against the Oakland Athletics. Davis dove for a sinking line drive off the bat of Willie McGee. He got to the ball. He made the attempt. but the impact of hitting the ground that hard tore his left kidney in 4 places. He suffered severe internal bleeding. He was passing blood. He stayed on the field through the rest of the half inning. He did not tell anyone how serious it was. He came off the field and collapsed in the dugout. He was rushed to an Oakland hospital for emergency surgery, while his teammates went on to complete the sweep of the athletics. He spent 11 days in the hospital. He later said that it took him 3 full years to feel like he had truly recovered from that injury. 3 years of his physical prime slipping away because of a dive that was celebrated as heroic in the moment and quietly devastating in the years that followed. 3 years during which his body was operating at a fraction of what it should have been, and the production numbers reflected it, even when the public explanation was harder to see. When you calculate what Eric Davis lost to that single play, you are not just counting hospital days. You are counting the seasons that followed, when the athlete the sport had watched at his absolute peak was grinding through a body that had been fundamentally altered by what happened in Oakland. And here is where the story takes a turn that says something uncomfortable about how baseball treated its players and how the culture of toughness was never just about the athletes. After that surgery, no one from the Reds executive staff called to check on him. Manager Lou Piniella did not call. The front office did not call. The man had just helped win a World Series championship. He was lying in a hospital in Oakland with a torn kidney and internal bleeding, and the phones in his room stayed silent. When he was stable enough to travel, his doctors told him he needed to return to Cincinnati for continued recovery. But the travel arrangements had to be specific. He needed a chartered medical transport plane equipped with a hospital bed and a specialized medical team. You do not move a man with 4 tears in his kidney on a commercial flight. This was a medical necessity, not a preference. And the Reds organization, led by owner Marge Schott, refused to pay for it. They offered excuses. They claimed they could not find an appropriate aircraft. Davis arranged the flight himself. He paid for it out of his own pocket. Then he forwarded the bill to Schott. The dispute became public. Davis held a press conference at the hospital in Cincinnati. He looked at the cameras and said exactly what was on his mind. He said, "If I were a dog, I would have gotten more care, and that's the truth." That line landed because it was true. It was not bitterness talking. It was not exaggeration. It was a man who had just delivered a championship to a franchise, suffered a life-threatening injury doing it, and was now paying his own medical transport costs because his employer could not be bothered to locate a plane. Even after a World Series ring, the system treated his body like an inconvenience it had already gotten what it needed from. The tough guy culture that baseball had built around Davis did not protect him. It used him. When he played through pain and made breathtaking catches, he was celebrated. When the consequences of those moments arrived in the form of hospital stays and recovery time and rest days, the same culture that cheered him turned skeptical. Critics questioned his toughness. Anonymous teammates, their names never attached to the quotes they gave, questioned whether he really wanted to play. Fans wondered if he was soft. Davis noted that the criticism rarely came to him face to face. It came through the media. It was leaked. It was shaped. And it put him in an impossible position. If he came back too fast and played poorly while still recovering, he got blamed for hurting the team. If he stayed out long enough to heal properly, he got called soft. There was no right answer inside a culture that measured toughness only by how fast a man returned, not by whether returning fast was actually smart or medically appropriate. This is the cruelty of the tough guy framework when applied to real human bodies. It creates a game with no winning move for the person actually trying to heal. It turns the act of recovery into a moral failure, and it makes the people doing the recovering feel ashamed of the very process their bodies need to survive. This no-win trap came to a head during the 1988 season, and it did so in the ugliest way possible. Davis was playing through a lingering rib injury, the same kind of damage he had been carrying since the Wrigley Field crash the previous September. His first half numbers were down. He was not healthy, but he was on the field, which was supposed to be the definition of toughness according to the culture around him. And then, on June 7th, 1988, the Cincinnati Enquirer published an article. The article cited an unnamed National League executive. That executive claimed that rumors were circulating about Davis. The rumors said his drop in performance was due to drug use. To understand why this hit Davis the way it did, you have to understand where he came from and what the accusation actually meant given his history. He grew up in South Central Los Angeles. He was surrounded by a drug culture that destroyed people he knew and people he loved. He actively chose a different path. He focused on sports. He used baseball as his way out and his way forward. He stayed away from everything that world offered on the streets because he had seen firsthand what it did to people over time. His older brother, Jim Jr., went by the nickname Jim Bean. Jim Jr. fell into addiction. He went in and out of incarceration over the years. He had warned Eric directly to stay away from the streets. He had seen what was coming for young men in their neighborhood and tried to protect his younger brother from it. And then, Jim Jr. was found dead outside a Los Angeles church at age 36. That was the family history behind the man the Cincinnati Enquirer article was targeting. An unnamed executive, hiding behind anonymity, was putting drug rumors into print about a man who had watched his own brother die from the world those rumors were meant to invoke. The accusation did not just threaten Davis's reputation. It struck at his identity, his family, and everything he had worked to build by choosing a different road than the one his brother had walked. Davis denied the allegations strongly. He pulled back from the media entirely and focused on letting his play answer the question. Reds general manager Murray Cook rejected the claims publicly. But the damage of a rumor does not go away just because the general manager calls it false. It sits in the public mind. It shapes how people see the injured player resting on the bench. And it told Davis something important about the system he was playing in, something he would carry with him long after the season ended. It told him that the people around him, the unnamed executives and anonymous commentators, were not looking for the truth when they talked about him. They were looking for an explanation that fit their existing assumption, which was that a man who missed games must be missing them for a reason that reflected badly on his character. That assumption said more about the culture than it did about Eric Davis. That system would be tested again in ways far more serious than rumors or anonymous quotes. By 1997, Eric Davis was playing for the Baltimore Orioles. He was 35 years old. He had been managing his body for over a decade of professional baseball. He had learned to tune out discomfort because tuning it out was what the sport had always asked of him. He had learned to keep going because stopping was what got you called soft, and he had heard that word too many times already. So when the abdominal pain started, he told himself it was the normal toll of a long season. When the fatigue came in ways that felt different from regular tiredness, he told himself he was just worn down. When the weight started dropping, he told himself it was the grind of playing professional baseball through summer heat. He had been through enough injuries to know what his body felt like under stress, and he convinced himself this was just more of the same. He had the entire framework of the tough guy culture behind him, reinforcing that belief every step of the way. It was not the same. During a game in Cleveland, he experienced sudden, sharp abdominal pain after a collision with the catcher at home plate. The pain did not fade the way normal collision pain does. It worsened when the team moved on to a series in New York. The trainers finally sent him back to Baltimore by train. He went to the University of Maryland Medical Center, where he spent more than a week. The doctors there looked at what was happening and concluded it was a localized abscess, something serious but manageable, something that explained the pain without explaining the full picture, something that let Davis continue telling himself it was all going to be fine. Davis was not satisfied with that answer. He transferred to Johns Hopkins Hospital. The doctors there performed a colonoscopy. What they found was not an abscess. What they found was a malignant tumor in his colon. The tumor was the size of a grapefruit or a fist, depending on how the doctors described it in different conversations. It was stage 3 colon cancer. The cancer had been growing while he played through the discomfort, while he told himself it was just the season wearing on him, while the culture around him confirmed that pushing through pain was what serious athletes did. On June 13, 1997, Dr. Keith Lillamo performed surgery at Johns Hopkins. He removed the tumor. He removed 1/3 of Davis's colon. The initial fear was that the cancer had spread to the lymph nodes because the nodes showed signs of inflammation. When the final results came back, the nodes were inflamed but clear. The cancer had not spread beyond the colon. The prognosis improved significantly with that news. But stage 3 is stage 3. The work ahead was long, and the road was uncertain. Davis began a chemotherapy regimen supervised by Dr. William Isaacoff at the UCLA School of Medicine. 36 treatments in total, 3 6-week cycles, each separated by a 2-week rest period. The full course ran from July 1997 into early 1998. Davis experienced fewer side effects than many patients going through the same regimen. He credited herbal teas made by the wife of his teammate Eric Anthony, which he drank regularly throughout the process. He also made a point of eating full meals before each session, which helped his body handle the treatments better than if he had gone in depleted. During his time at the cancer center, he walked into the pediatric oncology ward. He sat with children who were fighting their own battles, children who were facing diagnoses that offered them far less statistical hope than his own situation. He watched those children deal with what they were going through with a kind of resilience that stopped him completely. Whatever fear he was carrying about his own future, whatever dark moments he was working through during treatments, those children had something profound to teach him about perspective and about what it means to face something hard with grace. Then, in August of 1997, his brother Jim Jr. died. The same Jim Bean who had warned him about the streets. The same older brother whose life had taken the road Eric had avoided. The loss arrived in the middle of chemotherapy, in the middle of a fight for his own life, and it temporarily halted his physical rehabilitation and his preparation to return to the game. He returned to the active roster on September 15, 1997. He was still undergoing chemotherapy. He came back against the Cleveland Indians. The stadium gave him a standing ovation when he took the field. Medical professionals who studied his case described his return as the shortest recovery timeline for a major league player following a stage 3 colon resection. He had compressed a journey that most people would need years to complete into a matter of months, and stepped back onto a baseball field while treatments were still ongoing. And then the postseason arrived, and it gave him one more moment to add to a career full of them. In Game 5 of the 1997 American League Championship Series against the Cleveland Indians, Eric Davis came to the plate as a pinch hitter in the 9th inning. His team needed a run. He needed a moment, the way he had always needed big moments, to show up when everything was on the line. He hit a home run off Paul Ossenmacher. The game was won. A man who had been receiving chemotherapy for colon cancer a matter of weeks earlier had just hit a decisive home run in the 9th inning of a postseason game. The 1998 season that followed was not a footnote. Davis batted over .300 that year. He was named the Players' Choice Comeback Player of the Year. He did not just survive. He returned to a level of play that most fully healthy players would be proud of. But the comeback, as remarkable as it was, could not undo what had been taken. The injuries across his career, the Wrigley Field crash, the World Series kidney laceration, the years of chronic physical damage to his hamstrings, knees, shoulders, wrists, and neck, those had already consumed years of his prime that no amount of recovery could restore. The cancer battle that arrived in 1997 did not happen in isolation. It happened to a body that had been running at maximum effort for over a decade. A body that had been trained by culture and circumstance to ignore the signals it was sending. The tough guy culture did not cause his cancer, but it absolutely shaped the conditions in which that cancer was allowed to grow. It built the mental framework that told him pushing through pain was strength and stopping for medical attention was weakness. It built the environment in which a man experiencing severe abdominal pain, unexplained fatigue, and noticeable weight loss looked at his own symptoms and said, "This is just the season." It surrounded him with a set of values that rewarded endurance and punished caution. And those values followed him all the way to a Johns Hopkins examination room. That is the real weight sitting inside Eric Davis's career. Not just the injuries themselves, not just the cancer itself, but the way every layer of the system, the culture, the front office, the media, the anonymous critics and unnamed executives, all of it made it harder for a man who needed rest and medical attention to ever feel like he could ask for those things without losing something essential in the process. He won 3 Gold Gloves. He put together the most electric power and speed combination the sport has ever seen over a 162-game window. He played through things that would have ended careers on the spot. He survived stage 3 colon cancer and returned to bat over .300. He hit a postseason home run while still on chemotherapy. Every single one of those things is extraordinary. Together, they tell the story of an athlete whose talent was always bigger than the system's ability to protect it. And they also tell the story of a man who was handed a culture that was never truly designed to keep him whole. The culture wanted performances. It wanted spectacular catches and clutch home runs and fearless dives. It got all of those things. It just was not honest about what it was taking in return. Eric Davis paid that bill for years without fully understanding the full cost of the contract he had signed by deciding to play the way he played. The The honest reckoning with that story is what Eric Davis is doing now. At 64, he is not done competing. He has just changed the arena. He partners with the St. Elizabeth Cancer Center. He runs the Score Against Colon Cancer campaign. He stands in front of crowds and talks about unexpected fatigue. He talks about persistent abdominal pain. He names the exact symptoms he dismissed as nothing until they had grown into something nearly impossible to stop. He shares numbers that carry more weight right now than any batting average or slugging percentage. Colorectal cancer has a 97 to 98% cure rate when it is caught early. When it is found in its late stages, it becomes the deadliest cancer there is. Certain areas of the country face elevated rates of colorectal cancer, specifically because routine screening is not accessible or available. Kentucky stands among the highest in the nation for colorectal cancer rates, largely because communities there lack consistent access to preventive care and the colonoscopies that can detect the disease before it becomes a crisis. Davis carries these numbers into every conversation he has, because numbers cut through denial in a way that personal stories sometimes cannot. When a man hears that catching it early means a 97 to 98% chance of beating it, and finding it late means it becomes the deadliest cancer of all, that gap between early and late is no longer abstract. It becomes a choice. And Davis wants people to understand they still have time to make the right one. Davis understands something about barriers to care that goes beyond geography. The culture that kept him from speaking up during his career is the same culture that keeps men across the country from scheduling appointments, from mentioning symptoms to their doctors, from doing the basic preventative work that could save their lives. He knows that pattern from the inside. He wore it as an identity for years. He knows personally what it feels like to look at a symptom and talk yourself out of taking it seriously. He knows the mental gymnastics involved in deciding that the pain is manageable, that the fatigue is just exhaustion, that the weight loss is something explainable and normal. He did all of that. He did it while playing professional baseball, and he did it while the cancer grew. So when he stands in front of a crowd and tells them to get checked, he is not speaking from a position of distance. He is speaking from the exact place they are standing. So part of his advocacy is dedicated to dismantling the fear that surrounds the screening process. He talks about how modern colonoscopies work. Patients can now take an oral tablet preparation instead of the liquid laxatives that made the prep so unpleasant in earlier years. Modern sedation techniques make the procedure painless. The experience that people imagine when they think of the word colonoscopy does not match the reality of what the procedure actually involves today. Davis helps close that gap by putting his face and his name on a message that says, it is not as scary as you think, and the alternative is far worse. He talks alongside medical professionals like Dr. Doug Flora, who can explain the biological details of what happens when colorectal cancer goes undetected. Davis provides the human experience that makes the biology personal. Together, they reach people who would not listen to a doctor alone, but who will listen to a man who played in the World Series and nearly died because he waited too long. That combination matters more than either element alone. A doctor can tell you the facts. A former baseball player who has lived the consequences can make those facts feel real in a way a medical chart never will. Davis knows his audience. He knows he is talking to men who grew up watching sports, men who were taught the same lessons he was taught, men who have the same instinct to push through and keep going. He speaks their language because it used to be his language too. He looks at his career with clear eyes now. He does not minimize what he accomplished, but he also does not pretend that the cost was acceptable or that the system that pushed him to those accomplishments was built with his long-term well-being in mind. He says clearly that getting checked, going to the doctor when something feels wrong, taking warning signs seriously before they become emergencies, those are acts of genuine strength. The bravest thing a man can do when his body is telling him something is wrong is to listen. He has earned the right to say that in a way few people have. He played through walls and kidney lacerations and a cancer diagnosis. He knows what real toughness costs and what it looks like when it is applied correctly. And he is telling you now that the toughness the sport celebrated in him was not the kind that kept him safe. It was the kind that kept him silent until almost too late. The shocking truth in this story is not that Eric Davis got cancer. The shocking truth is that a system built around the idea of playing through everything, of never showing weakness, of grinding past pain no matter the cost, helped set the conditions for that cancer to go undetected until it was the size of a grapefruit. The shocking truth is that the same fearless style that made him the most electric player of his generation was also quietly destroying the body underneath. And the hopeful truth, the one Eric Davis carries into every speaking engagement and every hospital visit and every public appearance at 64, is that what ruined his prime does not have to ruin someone else's life. Because early detection is available, because the screening is easier now than it has ever been, because a 97 to 98% cure rate is waiting on the other side of a decision to get checked before it is too late. Eric Davis did not get to have the full prime his talent deserved. The injuries took pieces of it. The broken system around him took pieces of it. The cancer took whatever was left of those years. But he is still here, still standing, still using every part of that experience to reach people who need to hear it. And that matters as much as any home run, or stolen base, or diving catch he ever made in a career. Because the numbers from his playing career, as breathtaking as they are, exist only in record books. The work he is doing now has the potential to add years to actual living people's lives. That is a different kind of stat. It does not show up in a box score, but it is real and it is growing, and Eric Davis is the reason it is happening. If you have been putting off a screening, or dismissing fatigue that does not make sense, or telling yourself that persistent abdominal pain is just stress or just the grind of life, Eric Davis is talking directly to you. He was once the most electric player in baseball. He told himself the same things you are telling yourself. Listen to what he had to learn the hard way, so you do not have to learn it that way too. He stood at the intersection of athletic greatness and medical near disaster, and came out the other side with a message the world needed to hear. He lived inside the very culture that told him to be quiet and keep playing. He knows exactly why people resist getting checked, and he knows what that kind of resistance can cost. His voice on this matters in a way that very few voices can. He has been where you are, and he has seen where the road leads when you wait too long. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit like. Subscribe to Baseball Icons so you never miss what we put out next. And drop a comment below telling us what you think baseball has never fully reckoned with when it comes to how the sport treats the bodies and the lives of the people who play it for us. That conversation is long overdue, and it can start right here with you.